Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Honestly, we are approaching mid-February right now, so this is like a slight bit late, but we are gonna do my January wrap-up talking about everything that I read in the month of January, and this is just a little bit delayed because I've been busy with work and stuff, not for any reason of not wanting to talk about these books, because January was actually a pretty fantastic reading month for me. So this is one of my highest reading months ever in terms of number of books. Usually I'm somebody who averages about 6 books a month, and I don't really stray too far from that just because the page numbers of books that I'm reading tend to be fantasy books that are in the mid 400 to 600 page range a lot of the time. But this month in January, I read 10 books. That definitely does somewhat have to do with a couple of them being shorter, but on the whole, these books were all decent lengths, and I just kind of had a lot of time for reading, and I was really enjoying what I was reading. There was literally nothing in January that was rated below a 4, which is crazy. So I'm going to go for my classic approach where I talk about the books in order of lowest rated to highest rated, but very important to keep in mind for this month in particular that the lowest rated is not even a low rating at all. So these range all the way from 4, 4.25, 4.5, 4.75, and 5. And there are 4 or 5 stars out of 10 books. And I'm just gonna get right into talking about them because truly this was very, very enjoyable for me. So the first book to talk about is actually also the first book that I finished this year, and I think I read about half of it in 2023 and half of it in 2024 because I only had a few days left of last year when I started this, thinking that it's a short book that I could maybe fit in, but alongside that, me and Ben actually started A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie, so with my time split between the two, this novella also ended up being finished in 2024, which is fine, but just to say that even with how short this is, it was not even all read in 2024. But that is The Deep by Rivers Solomon, and so this is a novella, like I said, it's very short. This is a fascinating book. The concept behind The Deep is the fact that this race that we currently follow with our main character is sort of like mermaids, but they originated from the pregnant women and children of slave trading ships that were thrown overboard in the ocean. And this is obviously somewhat of a fantasy or surreal setting because these women have evolved into basically mermaids. So it has that sort of base concept that turns a very traumatic historic event into this exploration of what this community and people could look like if this was something that had happened. And not to say if slaves being thrown off of ships was something that had happened, but if those people that were so mistreated lived to basically flourish in a community of their own under the sea, so which is a very, very interesting and just emotionally fraught concept from the beginning. But we follow a main character named Yetu, who is the historian for her people, which basically means that she holds the traumatic memories, and for them, they have memories, but when it comes to their very rich history, they don't have the emotional capacity to all hold it. It's all held by one person, and every year, I think, the historian comes back and holds this ceremonial memory giving where all of the memories are shared among the people, and for a few days everyone remembers, and then the historian will take all the memories back to essentially save the rest of the people from that suffering and from the trauma that is remembered in their history. But this role is very demanding and very traumatic in itself, to be the only person who is shouldering this burden. So our main character struggles with that, and that's sort of the start of the story. And obviously, since it's a novella, I don't really want to say too much. It's quite a short span for the story to take place in. But yeah, I gave this 4 stars because I really, really thought that this was such a strong concept, and I really liked pretty much everything about the story and the way that it went, and the way that the plot was balanced with what the character needed and it was very much emotionally driven. The one reason I think that I gave this a 4 is because just the way that it was written, I think was a little bit purposefully, it was hard to get into the character's head, but at the same time, the entire time I was reading this novella, it felt a little bit at arm's length from me. And then at the same time, with it being so short, like I think I actually would have loved a full-length novel of this, because I think that even with the writing style making me feel at arm's length, if it was longer, I may have had like more time to really immerse myself in the emotions of this. But as it stands, the creatures that this society actually is that have evolved, they are kind of foreign, and they are kind of like an entirely different culture with an entirely different set of ways and traditions. And so it was just like barely dipping a toe into that, and then like not getting to explore all of it, which I don't think that was the point either. However, I think that's all just to say that like maybe if it was longer, it would have gotten a little bit higher of a rating, but I still really, really enjoyed it. And so the 4 just kind of reflects that I still think it's an extremely strong novella. The next 2 books I have to talk about, I actually don't have a physical copy of either of them because they were both SPIFFBO 9 books that are 2 of the finalists for that. So I read both of those on ebook, and the first one that I have to talk about, the one that got 4 stars, is Master of the Void by Wend Raven. And so I'm not going to go too far into this because for both this and the next book, I actually have a more in-depth review of the first 3 finalists that I read, which was my most recent video. So basically, Master of the Void kind of gets us started off with, we're following 2 young male characters, Ormond and Darius, and they live in a world where magic is a very established part of the world. So everyone, if they have the privilege of being able to study and afford to go to university, they, on their 13th birthday, can be tested to see basically which avenue of magic they show an affinity for, or like whether they have magic. And there are some people who don't, but in this world, the entire magic system draws from celestial power, and so you are tested for magic on the 13th moment of your birth, where the stars and everything would all be in the same alignment that they were when you were born, and that is able to determine your magical ability. And so both of our young protagonists are about to turn 13, and a lot of their stories hinge on how this testing goes, or rather doesn't go. They both get some sort of confusing results, and it's a little bit of a mystery on what this actually means, what it means to be born under like the absence or the death of a star rather than the presence of a star, which is what most people would have and would determine their magic, I guess, more easily or more conventionally. And so really we follow these 2 young boys as they kind of like they deal with what happens, and they take very different paths from it, and they deal with it in different ways. And we do also follow a few other characters. We follow a couple of brothers of the character Ormond, and we follow one of his friends. And then we also follow a couple of the friends of our other character Darius. And we kind of just like, I don't really want to say too much more than that, because the journeys that they both go on and the different paths that they take are very important. But I will say that I think that this book had a lot to like, and I talk way more about that in my review, but I ended up giving this one a 4, and I thought that it was a really strong entry, and I'm really glad that I read it. Next up, we have The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan, which I gave 4.25 stars. And so once again, this SPIFFBO book is included in that video that I posted with 3 reviews. The other book I read earlier, not in January, but that Daughter of the Beast by E.C. Greaves is also included in that one. But The Wickwire Watch, like I said, gave it 4.25 stars. This one is my personal favorite so far out of the finalists that I've read, and it really has a lot of personality. I think that's a big part of what I like about it. So The Wickwire Watch starts off, we're introduced to this sort of murder mystery where we open our story in a town where there is the death of an older man, and he is found like with this mysterious artifact. And at first, it is a mystery about how he died, whether he was killed or whether he just kind of died. And it comes out when the investigation is being performed, because of the presence of this artifact. It is then thought that this man was actually a member of a group of notorious outlaws in this world. And this is a shock to the community because no one would have thought that of him. And this is an accusation on the level of the most heinous of crimes because of the way that this notorious group is viewed. Being thought to be a member of them is basically the worst thing that somebody can say about you. And so we open our story with this concept, but our main character, Ink, is not directly involved in this conflict, but he is in fact an orphan who has run away from an orphanage, and he is a teenager. He's somewhere around the age of 15, and he is passing through this town while all of this is going down, and he gets himself tangled up in it kind of inadvertently. But Ink is the character that we follow. He is sort of a scrappy, sarcastic young guy who he had this very rough upbringing where he had kind of had a family at one point. His grandfather passed away, and after that he didn't have any family. He's kind of been taught not to trust anyone, and he's a little bit cynical for his young age, but he is a fun character to follow. He does have a lot of personality, and we kind of see how he gets into all of this mess, and the story really takes off from there. So I really liked it. I thought that the character work was great. I really liked the introduction of the politics, which all really intertwines with the world building and the magic. They're all kind of one entity that you uncover together through this investigation, because as you learn more about why this murder was so important, you learn about the history of what has happened with this group of outlaws, which all ties into the political things that they were involved in and all of the magic that kind of exists in this world. So I thought it was very well done. I really can't wait to read the next book in this series whenever I get a chance to. And that's all I'll say because, like I said, I do have more detail in that other review. Next up, we've got two books that I rated 4.5 stars, and they are both the most recent and or conclusion books in their respective series. So the first one of those is The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch. This book is a 4.5 star just based on the fact that it's not as strong, in my opinion, as the other two books, The Lies of Locke Lamora and Red Seas Under Red Skies, but it's still something that I just love because I love Scott Lynch's writing. I love these main characters. He has built something that when I'm reading it, I just enjoy myself so much. I can sink right into it. Like, it didn't really bother me too much that the plot wasn't as strong in this as in the other two. But it's like, I gave it a 4.5 because I recognize that objectively, but at the same time, I can't say that I didn't love it because I did. I enjoyed reading it so much. And so I will be very excited to see whatever Scott Lynch comes out with next. It really sounds like we might be getting news about the Gentleman Bastards novellas soon, which, like, fingers crossed, I would love that. I will read anything that he puts out because he puts so much entertainment and personality into his work while still just having that, like, great prose, great dialogue, great characters, and like I said, like, maybe not as strong of a plot, but a plot that's still, regardless, like, I was flipping to the last page because I still was compelled to find out what was going to happen. So a very strong entry into this series that I am very much hoping that sometime in the near future, maybe in the next year, we'll be getting news about the next book. The next 4.5 star that I have is one I have similar things to say about as Republic of Thieves, and that is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. And it's not that in any sense these books are similar to one another, but Ruthless Vows is the second and concluding book in the Letters of Enchantment duology that began with Divine Rivals. and I loved Divine Rivals, and I thought that Ruthless Vows was a very, very strong book as well, and I think that it did pretty much everything that I was hoping that it would do when I was thinking about where the story was going to go after Divine Rivals. And I liked the growth for our characters. I liked the struggles that they had to face, and kind of the growing that they did as a result of those struggles, a lot of the relationships that they formed, and I liked the kind of ominous feeling that this entire book had after the conclusion of Divine Rivals. You know that something is coming, and you know that it's at this point unavoidable. Like, it felt the war that we explored in Divine Rivals. The characters went to the front, but it still felt far away from their homes, but you knew that it was inevitably going to, like, the war front was eventually going to come to them. And I think that the tension of that was really, really well done. I don't really have anything negative to say about this, just except for the fact that the storyline being what it was, this type of plot, it's not my favorite type of plot. Like, I loved the plot in Divine Rivals more just because it's a storyline that I personally love more, not because I necessarily think that it is better or has more merit, but the storyline that went on in here, just like the section of story that had to be told to get from point A to point B, it wasn't one that I loved quite as much. So that's pretty much literally the only reason why it was 4.5 stars. I really would recommend this duology pretty widely. Like, if you think that this sounds interesting at all, you should probably pick it up if you think it sounds like the type of books that you will like, because this being my first experience with Rebecca Ross, I really had a good time, and I can't wait to pick up A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless later this year. Next up, we have the one book from January that I gave 4.75 stars, and that is A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott, which is a collection of essays. And this author, I mean, I tabbed 4 essays in here. Those were my favorites. The only reason that I didn't give this 4.75 stars is because when it comes to essays that are this personal, I don't always feel like the author has to be like making an argument that you agree with or like persuading you, because it's not really about that. It's more just about like using personal experiences and trying to illuminate the topics that she is talking about in each of these essays. But just the reason I didn't give it a full 5 stars is because there were a few times where I thought that like the comparisons were a little bit weaker, or the essay maybe lost its way a little bit, but for the most part, I didn't think there was really any bloat. Like, that's why those ones stood out, is because the other essays seemed so polished and so well put together, and like they didn't meander, or if they did, like you could see exactly why it was doing it and the effectiveness that it had. But basically my whole point is to say that the entire thing was so good that it was kind of easier to pick out like the 1 or 2 flaws and see that it wasn't perfect, but it was still really, really strongly written and really well put together. And the topics that she covered in here, like when it comes to the things that Indigenous people experience, but not only that, but even just like a life of living with people who experience mental illness and struggle with that, and the fact that you love them and they love you even when they have abused you in the past, and the fact that living in poverty, growing up in poverty, is so extremely difficult in like more ways than you could possibly imagine, things that you don't think about when you think about poverty. And the way that the world views families like hers is very heartbreaking, but I loved the way that she wrote it. And 4 of my favorite essays in here, the ones that I tabbed, were 34 grams per dose, which talks about like health and the food, like food insecurity, food that you have access to, eating disorders, the relationship with your body, everything like that. Then there's one called Scratch that talked about how her and a lot of her family had head lice for like a decade, basically, because to fully fumigate and get rid of lice, you need the like level of privilege where you can get rid of your clothes, or you can separate an entire area to do this or to do that, or you need to be able to do the whole family at once. And if you don't have the resources to buy the things that you need to clean the lice out of everyone's hair at once, the lice is not going to go away, and things like that. And then the same space. Why do I not remember what the same space was about? I think, the same space was about, it's mostly about Toronto, but it's an essay about how like Indigenous people occupy these spaces that people don't necessarily think that they belong in. Like, people think of Indigenous people as belonging in nature, even though that land has been taken from them. And then when they try to exist in cities, people think that they don't belong there either. That was a very, very strong one. And then the other one, which is actually the first in book order, is on seeing and being seen. And to be honest, I don't think this one is even one that I can attempt to like summarize in my own words. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I really loved the way that it was written. So she makes you feel a lot of emotions and sheds light on a lot of topics in this essay collection, and I ate it up. I thought it was incredible. So that is your endorsement to go read this book. So last but not least, of course, we have the 4 books that I rated 5 stars this month. So I'm going to try not to completely ramble on while I talk about these, but good start, because the first one is only like 88 pages long, and that is Foster by Claire Keegan. So Claire Keegan is an Irish author that has a number of novellas out now, and I have heard of this author because of Ben, and these copies are actually like his/ours that he brought over here, and I've finally gotten to read them because I obviously wasn't going to buy them myself, knowing that Ben was bringing them here for our collection to have them. So Foster is a novella that is about a girl who, her parents have a number of children. They are not in a position to look after that many children, and they essentially drop her off for a summer or for a period of months with a more well-off couple that have the resources to take care of her and don't have children of their own. And I think that the girl is about 9 years old. And this novella is really just a quiet, heartfelt, emotional journey from like the girl's perspective of what her time with this couple is like. And it is so, it's heartwarming, but it's also heartbreaking, because you are reading from a child's perspective, and it's not written in a childish way, but it's written in that fashion where it's clear that the 9-year-old doesn't understand everything that goes on. She has a very matter-of-fact lens of the world, where when you're reading it as an adult, you can easily pick up on the subtext that she's missing, because she's just presenting things to you as she sees them, but she doesn't necessarily understand. Like, partway through, it becomes very clear that the couple that she's staying with did have a child that they somehow lost. And so that would be a very emotional undercurrent to the book, because the perspective that we're reading from, the girl, doesn't really fully understand that, but it comes through in the relationship that forms. And so I don't want to say too much, because obviously this is extremely short, but I found it extremely emotional and just very like hard-hitting, and I wasn't expecting for it to pack such a punch in such a small number of pages. So I would 110% recommend this. I loved it. Next up in the 5 stars, we have a book that was mentioned earlier in the video, at the very start actually, and that is A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first book in the Age of Madness trilogy, which is part of the First Law world, as many of you are probably familiar with already. But this series is a new generation of characters. It takes place, I think, about 20 years in the future, like give or take, maybe even 25 years in the future, from the standalones. And I guess it depends on, no, it's probably 25 years in the future from the original trilogy, but not from the standalones. The standalones spanned a period of time in between that. I'm not 100% sure how long it's been since each of them. that's besides the point. My point is that this follows a new generation of characters while still having some of our old favorites present to a certain extent, but it truly does rest on the merits of these new characters, and they are strong. Like, I should never have doubted Joe Abercrombie, to be honest, but the thought of having an entirely new cast of characters is always a little bit daunting in a world you already know and love, because it could fall flat, but he would never let it fall flat because he has such amazing character work. So we follow the sons and daughters of the old regime, and it's very clear after getting a little bit into this why this series and trilogy is called The Age of Madness, because we are basically looking at the Industrial Revolution in this world and the consequences of all of that, the class wars, like the divide between the rich and the poor, and the fact that there are still kings and nobles, but there are also a growing population of the working poor that are working in industrial complexes for owners that are an entirely different type of rich than the nobles that have existed before them in like the feudalist model of society. So it's extremely interesting, it's extremely chaotic, and it just has Joe Abercrombie's classic flavor of that dialogue and that character work and how people interact with each other that just like has you so invested and not really like truly liking any of the characters because they're good people, but you like to follow them because they might be terrible people, but they might also just be like somebody that you're rooting for, even though you know that they're not the best. And I love that about him. I love the balance that is struck here. And this was just, it was an amazing opening to this series. And we are, in fact, most of the way through The Trouble with Peace, because that is the book for February, and it just continues to be strong. So I can't say enough good things about this. A Little Hatred was an easy 5 stars. The final 2 books to talk about that were both 5 stars can quite naturally be talked about together, because that is The Girl in the Tower and The Winter of the Witch, which I think you're probably seeing them held the wrong way around, but that's fine. This is the second book. This is the third book in the trilogy, and I love Catherine Arden. This was a reread for me, so it was no shock that these were both 5 stars, because I loved this trilogy the first time around, and I loved it the second time around. It is the perfect blend of that fairy tale feeling with like a sort of modern like plot and pacing, and the way that Catherine Arden deals with the magic and the like religion and paganism and the sort of like old magic of Russia and what our characters are balancing between. It's so well done and it's so incredible, and I want to just recommend this series to everyone. I don't know, I don't really have like a lot of words in an in-depth review to say about this right now. I just want to tell you that I love it and that you should read it. The first book starts off a little bit slower, a little bit more insular, a little bit more of a fairy tale feeling, but the trilogy as a whole has an incredible arc. The second and third books are definitely faster paced and more wide in scope than the first one is, but I love all of them. I think I love the first 2 slightly more than the third one, but I love all of them pretty much equally. They're all in my favorites, and the reread cemented the Winter Night trilogy as a favorite fantasy trilogy of mine, and it's a perfect winter read. So if you're interested in it, like, we're still in February, you still have time, like February and March, very much still winter, so get reading. Unless you're in Australia, then wait for your winter. So, like I said, a very strong showing this month. Those are the 10 things that I read in the month of January. I'm pretty impressed with myself. I've made a good start on February so far, but I doubt that I'm gonna finish with 10 books. That's just a ridiculous number. There were a couple of novellas in there, of course, so we'll see how it goes, but they count nonetheless. So, please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, what you think of them, if you agree with my thoughts, or if you don't, or if you haven't read them but you are excited to get to any of these books. I would love to hear what you think, and I would love to chat with you about that. As always, please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. As always, I will have my Discord with Ben and my socials linked in the description, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!